Hey everyone, what's going on? Today we're going to be looking at Venser the Sojourner, brand new blue and white planeswalker from the Ether Drift set. We have seen a Vanguard of this guy, but let's talk about what this new planeswalker brings to the table. So first off, we're starting with a pretty decent hit point total. We got 125 life. Mana gains are pretty solid too. Pretty typical of the more recent blue-white planeswalkers that we've gotten. +5 on white, blue, and +2 on green, with -2 on black and red. I like this spread because I like having a lot of mana gains on my on-match colors, even though the cards I'm playing don't have a lot of gem conversion built in, but it is something you can build for if you want. I decided to go a different route with my deck builds, so we'll get into that when we talk about those decks, and I'll explain to you why when we start looking at the abilities. Deck limits, we got 7 creatures, 5 spells, and 7 supports. I was in Godsmaster's Discord, and he was talking about this deck limit, and I gotta agree with him. So they're only going to give us 5 spells, which sucks because I really like the option of playing a lot of different spells. So only having 5 is just really needlessly hamstringing a planeswalker. But especially if they're going to give us 7 supports and not that many spells, I feel like what's the harm in just giving us more supports to play? However, you don't really need a lot of different supports in here for a specific reason. And we're going to talk about that first ability and what I think you should do to build around it. So Artist Inventor, ability 1 is 8 loyalty. Fetch the first 2 supports from your library, then gain X mana. X is 2 plus the amount of shields on support tokens you control. I messed that up, but you get the gist. So being able to fetch supports from your library is really powerful because you can build around either 1 support, 2, maybe 3 if you want. And the ability to fetch them at will, basically, if you have loyalty built up enough to do so, because you know that you're consistently going to be able to grab a key piece of your strategy if you want it. So that to me is a very Daxos-like strategy, because Daxos' first ability fetches an enchantment or an aura out of your library and puts it into your hand. So you can reliably grab a support every time and do something with it. If you want to play even something like Leyline of the Guild Pact and have it be your only support in your deck, every time you overflow, you do that and you're just going to be able to overflow twice if you want. So there are a lot of things you can do if you think about this ability in that way, where you're always fetching supports. You can get it so that you're fetching the same support every time with only 1 support. But I didn't go quite that restricted because, for one, the Planeswalker's deck limits don't allow for that really. And 2, I found it to be a little bit too inconsistent in gameplay, because you need to really be careful about the support you choose to put in there, and it's not always going to be the best card to fetch in every scenario. It's just the nature of the game, where you never know what you're going to face, and the support you want to grab is not going to be that useful for where you're at. In Legacy, you get a lot more options, of course, but I found in my testing, I like having just a few supports, not too many, but just enough so that you can reasonably rely on getting an important card into your hand. The gaining X mana really comes into play if you build for it. You can get a lot of mana out of this ability if you build for it. And I have a few ways of doing that, but I think that having a creature that creates a support token that can grow every turn is really the key to getting a lot out of this ability. But it's a great ability. I really like it. I think that building around this ability is the reason to play this planeswalker. Sojourner Masterpiece ability 2, 9 loyalty, creates 2 Sojourner book tokens and a random support you control gains 3 shields. That could actually be the Sojourner book token gaining the 3 shields too. Especially if you start with this ability. And that's kind of what I like to do. I like to start by using the second ability and have it fuel the first ability whenever I use it. So I pretty much start with ability 2 and then spam ability 1. But what do the Sojourner book tokens actually do? They are a support card with 3 shields, artifact, legendary, white and blue. At the beginning of your turn, you gain X life. X is 3 plus the greatest shield on non-token supports you control. So this actually will gain you a decent amount of life. It's actually a pretty good ability to keep yourself safe in that regard. And then this support loses 1 shield. So you do every so often might need to re-up on this Sojourner book if you want, especially if you're not playing a creature that creates a token support itself. But this is a pretty solid little ability for gaining life, and it really helps to fuel that first ability. I mean, not amazing on its own, but it does have synergy with that first ability. And then Artificer Legacy, ability 3, 17 loyalty. This is one that I don't use very often. Create 3 traveling portal tokens. Then return all creatures to their owner's hand. Those cards gain X mana. X is the greatest shield of supports you control. So I really only play this ability if I'm behind for whatever reason and I need to get back to a more even playing field. So if I don't have anything else on the board and I play this, then it just basically bounces all my opponent's creatures back to their hand, and it gives me a chance to catch back up. It's rare that I get myself into that position, but it has helped for that sort of things. And I pretty much ignore it when I have a solid board state. It's not going to help me at all. It's only really going to help them. So I don't really use it. The 3 traveling portal tokens, this is what they do. They're a support card with 3 shields, artifact colorless. When this support's gem is matched, exile an opposing card at random. This effect can affect Vanguard supports, then shuffle the board. It is a potentially good ability, but the problem is this would be a lot better if the supports did not reinforce, because you really want more of these into play if you want to be able to hit them reliably or make your opponent hit them reliably. And it just doesn't happen often enough for it to justify not only the cost of creating this ability, but the negative effects that you have when you create this support card. So I don't really like this ability. I almost never use it. It's fine as an emergency kind of reset of the board, but for me, it's really all about using its first and second ability, because this one just does not bring enough to the table to make it worth it. The pros. So targeted support fetch and mana gain has huge potential for deck building. Like I was saying, you can build your deck so that you always fetch the supports you want. And the mana gain is interesting. It used to be that the supports that you fetch get the mana gain, but they changed it so that the mana gain goes from the top of your hand down. So your first card in your hand gets that mana into it. So you can play around with that a bit. You can say, all right, well, actually the cards in my hand are more important to me, so I'll leave them ready for the mana gain when I use the first ability. Or you can be like, I actually need to play those supports this turn for whatever reason, so let me clear space in my hand so that the cards that I fetch are the only 2 in my hand, so those get the mana. So those are 2 different ways of thinking about that ability. But yeah, just the fact that you can fetch supports is awesome. And I really like thinking about the deck building potential of that. He's got solid mana gains and a high life total as well. The cons of him, though, the third ability has way too many drawbacks to be worth using in most cases. Like I said, you are bouncing your opponent's creatures, but you're giving them mana at the same time. That third ability for you could be okay if you're playing a lot of creatures that really their benefit is on enter the battlefield effects. But blue and white, you're not doing it that much. There are some creatures that have some solid enter the battlefield effects for that, but that means you have to build in a creatureless win con. So there are ways of building around it, but it's not my favorite way of using Venser. And then also the low limit on spells you can use really prevents certain deck builds. I can't imagine Gauze being a big fan of that because he's a big spell slinger creating loop decks, and this Planeswalker really isn't suited for it. So I imagine he's not going to be a big fan of this Planeswalker, but I really like his first and second abilities. So let me show you what I built for him because I got some really fun decks that I quite enjoy playing. Okay, this deck is built around a lot of new cards here, so that's kind of cool. It's centered around artifacts, and I just have a lot of things in here that help with getting artifacts in play, which there's a lot of synergy around all these cards. For example, we got Riptide Gearhulk. It's a new mythic. It is exclusive as of now, but it will be available for crafting later when the new set comes. So it's a double strike artifact construct, 2/5 for 20 mana. Prowess, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Boost 5 at the beginning of your turn, return the first opposing creature and random opposing support to its owner's hand. So this is kind of reminds me a little bit of Agris Cost, where there's a little bit of a delay between the ability to remove and when you play this card a lot of times. But if you could get the boost up in different ways, then you can get there quicker. So this card is pretty cool. It does have a lot of potential. It's just a little pricey to get out in normal ways. So it's not usually one that I pay for with just straight up mana gains with just straight up gem matches. So it's something that I build towards for later. But, you know, it's not like a super essential card or anything. So if you want to use something else instead, that's totally cool. Some other artifact you like more. We got Adaptive Omni Tool, which is a brand new masterpiece, support card artifact equipment. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures get +1/+1 for each artifact card you control. When your first creature attacks, fetch the first artifact card from your library, and that card gains full mana. So basically, with almost all of my cards being artifacts, you just kind of never know what you're going to get, but you know it's going to be a good artifact card because that's just how we're building the deck. So this is a pretty cool way to get a free card for yourself every turn, and yeah, I like it. Kemet, Master of Metal. I've been mostly using this for the +1, which is fetch the first 2 artifact cards from your library. Those cards gain 1 mana for each of the support shield. So it comes into play, you get the +1, and you get 2 artifact cards with 6 mana into them. And you could just have this in the background, fetching you some cards, giving them mana, and you could do what you want from there. But yeah, it's a decent Vanguard that I like for this deck here. The -3, deal X damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. X is the number of artifact cards you control, including their reinforcements. I haven't had this really do a lot for me yet. I haven't really tried to build around that part of the card. I'm sure it's good, but I just haven't really tried to. Then gain control of each opposing creature in Vanguard support with base cost 18 or less. I have used this here and there. The -12 is a lot. If you do want to build around this Vanguard, I think you need to build like kind of more of a proliferate deck for it. So it's cool, but I mostly use it for the +1. Golden Wish, we're going to grab some artifact supports or maybe the Tezzeret Vanguard, and then we're gaining a bunch of loyalty there. So no brainer inclusion in here. We got Mystical Teachings, get that Golden Wish out even quicker. Oil Deep Gearhulk. Ward, drain 10 mana from hand. When this creature enters the battlefield, your opponent discards their first and last card. Just a great enter the battlefield effect. That's mainly why this is in here. It is an artifact, and it's also got lifelink, which is great. And then Marvin Murderous Mimic ends up being the win con a lot of times. It's also an artifact. It's a 14 mana, 2/2 artifact toy. At the beginning of your turn, choose target creature, then this creature gets +X/+X. X is equal to that creature's power. So pretty simple. You just put this card into play. At the beginning of your next turn, you choose the creature with the highest power that you can. Doesn't even have to be yours. So you get that right away. You get that buff right away. And then pretty much every turn, you just select yourself and you're doubling your power. So grows quickly. And it doesn't really take that many turns to become deadly. So solid creature that you don't want to have stick around for too long. Portal to Phyrexia. It's removal and graveyard recursion. And if you're playing something like Adaptive Omni Tool, it's possible that you grab it and it's free for you. There are a couple different ways of tweaking this deck. If you only want to play certain artifacts, that's one way of going about it. You just play Adaptive Omni Tool, Portal to Phyrexia, and some other really good artifact, and that's all you really need. Requisition Raid, you probably know what this does already. The Spree 1 and Spree 2. It's one of the best, if not the best, removal card in Standard right now, at least as a spell. Rakdos probably takes that mantle as the number one removal card in Standard, but we don't have that option, so Requisition Raid is good. And then Possession Engine, another very useful card. One of my favorites from the set. When the support enters the board, gain control of target opposing creature, then disable that card until the beginning of your next turn. If you don't have room in your hand and you steal the creature, then it just gets destroyed. So it works as removal even if you have 3 creatures in play. And then my favorite part of this card, at the beginning of your turn, disable that card until the beginning of your next turn. Then gain X mana. X is the power of your first disabled creature. So depending on what you steal, you can even buff it up and get more mana out of it. But if you steal a big creature like a Galta, that's getting you 15 mana a turn. So there's a lot of ways to gain mana from this deck that doesn't even rely on gem conversion. So it's a cool deck for those kinds of objectives where you're not supposed to convert gems. But yeah, I really like this deck. I think it does really well for me. It's one of the more fun ones that I've been able to build for Venser. And yeah, just use his first ability to fetch some of these artifacts into your hand, and you're going to do well. So that's it for this one. So let's move on to the next one. All right, this is my other fun deck to play with Venser. It went through a lot of different iterations, but I enjoy where it is now. And yeah, I'll just talk you through some of it. So the first thing I did when I was trying to build something was trying to do the whole Daxos sort of thing where you are very specific in the types of cards you want to fetch with its first ability. With its first ability, I started by having Strict Serenade as my only support. It's a PM2 mythic. The support can't be reinforced. The support can't gain shields. When your opponent casts a card, destroy that card. If you do, create a bird token under your opponent's control. At the end of your turn, the support loses 1 shield. When the support is destroyed, put it on the bottom of your library. So you can't really recur this card from your grave. So what you do instead is just fetch it with his ability, and you'll always have 2 Strict Serenades in your hand to play next turn. Thing is, unless you have a lot of things supporting that, you're really kind of limiting your options you have beyond that little combo. So especially, and this is where things like the spell limitation really hamper what you can do with that concept. So I had to bring in some more supports to support. My next inclusion was Ambiguity. When its support enters the board, create a time bubble token. When a time bubble token is destroyed, deny 3 gems. First opposing creature gets -X/-X. X is the number of denial gems on the board. So these 2 supports together were a really good lockdown combo. And I paired it with Ariet the Beguiler because Ariet, at the end of your turn, if you control 2 or less creatures, gain control of target opposing creature until the beginning of your next turn. If you don't fetch the first enchantment card from your library with mana value of 10 or less, that card gains full mana. So even if you don't have 3 creatures and you choose to not now the gaining control of the opposing creature, it will just fetch you that enchantment. So having Ambiguity as the only enchantment in this deck means that I will always pull Ambiguity with her. And then that leaves the first ability to pull the Strict Serenade. So I was running this with 2 supports for a while, and that helped because I was likely to pull Strict Serenade with the first ability. The thing is, they changed how Venser worked in the last little patch update, and now it's just the first cards in your hand gain the mana, which aren't usually going to be the supports you pull. And, for better or worse, I like the way that it works now, but it took some getting used to. So that just meant that I was just getting these supports in my hand, and they weren't necessarily getting mana. So it was making the effectiveness of that combo, of that strategy, not as reliable. So I came in and added a few other supports, and I'll explain why I chose these. Nico Light of Hope. At the beginning of your turn, create 4 shard tokens, and these are enchantment shards. When this support gem is matched, gain 3 mana. When the support's destroyed, surveil 2, and then draw a card. What the shard token actually does isn't that consequential. What we're really using it for is to fuel our first ability, because every turn this support is gaining 8 shields, because at the beginning of turn you're doing 4 times 2, and then you're just gaining a ton of mana every turn because of that shard token and the thing that you're doing with the first ability. And then a very effective pairing with Nico Light of Hope is Sarah's Sanctum, because at the beginning of your turn, convert X gems to white. X is 2 plus the number of enchantment cards you control, including their reinforcements. So we're reinforcing that shard token every turn, which is going to make the white gem conversion huge after just a few turns because of all the reinforcements we're putting on our enchantments. So we got Ambiguity making enchantment supports and Nico Light of Hope. So really good gem conversion there. And then Banner of Kinship, because our creatures, although very useful, are not very strong. They don't have a lot of power, so it's going to take a long time to win if you don't have a way to buff your creatures. Banner of Kinship is by far the best way to buff your creatures in Standard right now. When the support enters the board, all your creatures get +X+X. X is the total shield of all support cards you control. So with all these supports in play, this is going to get you a huge buff whenever you use it. So whenever it enters the battlefield, and hopefully we're going to be fetching a few of those along the way when we're building up our board state and using our first ability and all that. Steam Core Scholar is here for the loyalty gain, but the mana gain also helps, especially in the especially early on in the match. But I am mostly using it for the loyalty gain there. Then we got Lock and Load and Rite of the Moth are good together, because if you have a lot of creatures in your hand, when you play Lock and Load, Rite of the Moth will bring them back. And they get Lifelink, Death Touch, and Finality. So if you get a Banner of Kinship and your creatures are pretty big and they have Death Touch, then they make for very good blockers. If your Steam Core Scholar has Death Touch and is buffed up a lot by Banner of Kinship, then it makes for a pretty good blocker. So I like it for that reason. And then, of course, Requisition Raid, because it's a white planeswalker, and so that's kind of a requirement to have in our deck. So you can see how it plays out. There's a lot of fun things going on, a lot of good synergy. So I hope you enjoy seeing how that works, and I hope you can build it. All right, let's get into grades. All right, starting off as always with max hit points. Pretty good, actually. 125 is more than I was expecting to have. And I think that's pretty good for a blue and white planeswalker. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an A. Pretty good. Mana spread. I always enjoy having a lot of mana. I always enjoy on-color matches being high. So gaining 8 mana on blue and white is good. So I'm going to give it a B+. It's all offset by the -2 on off-color matches. And green gets +5, so that's also an option to convert to, but you definitely want to stay in the blue and white if you can. Ability 1 is really the reason to play this planeswalker, in my opinion. It's the most interesting. It's the one you can build around the most. And I think it gives you the most benefit. I'm actually giving it an A+. Ability 2, its main function is to fuel the ability 1. You get a decent amount of life from it if you build it up enough. So it does have an extra function to it just beyond fueling ability 1. So it's actually pretty good. So I'm actually going to give it an A+, just simply for that passive life gain. It really helps sometimes. You could even build for it if you want, but I personally haven't gotten around to it. Ability 3, not a big fan. I don't like all the drawbacks and the benefit to the opponent that it gives you, and it's very unreliable. Having to match into one support on the board is not very easy. It's one of those cards that can end up in the corner. If it had mana field, it'd be a lot better, but like I said, best would have been if it did not reinforce. Unfortunately, it's just not a reliable way to remove things, so I don't really like it. It's a C for me. Versatility, the lack of spell slots kind of knocks them down a bit because I really want to be able to build certain decks that I'm not allowed to because of the restrictions on spells. But if you do want to build around the first ability supports, carefully choosing the right ones, finding ways to gain mana, he can be fairly versatile, but kind of in a narrow way, if that makes sense at all. So I'm going to give him a B. And card utility, I think is really good to build around certain supports. I think he definitely enhances support-based strategies because his kit is there to fetch supports for you, and you get a lot of benefit from having a lot of token supports on the board. So he is a unique planeswalker to build for, and I think he does all right. So I'm going to give him a B+ there. And then fun. As long as you embrace his strengths and you find this type of play and deck building strategy engaging for yourself, I think you can have a lot of fun with them. Personally, I like him. I like to try and build around him. I really wish you got more spell support. I really wish you had more slots to put in the deck. I really wish you could put more spells into your decks. That would be perfect for me. I think I probably would rate this guy higher if you could, so you could really go full on Daxos with them. But, it is what it is. For me, the fun is at an A. If it let me build everything I wanted to, he might be a S tier fun for me. So final grade for me, pretty good. I'll probably use him in certain events. And depending on where the next set takes us and everything, what sort of supports we get. I haven't even really touched him with Legacy, but, being able to fetch an Omni with your first ability is pretty rad too. But then again, that means you only play one support, and that means you would have to play 4 creatures in a deck like that. So there are some challenges inherent in that type of build too. So aside from that, I do think he's a pretty good planeswalker. Is he the best blue and white option? Not usually, but I do think that people will enjoy this planeswalker when he comes out. He might not be for everybody. I think he's going to have his fans just like Daxos because of the power of that first ability. So I'm going to give him a B+. I think that's pretty good for him. He's right on the cusp of being an A- walker for me. He would have been an A+ if we got one more spell slot for him. But hey, that's just what they decided to give us. And yeah, I'm happy to have this planeswalker in my collection. Webcore's designers did a pretty good job of making a unique planeswalker that brings a different strategy to the table to blue and white. I just wish that there were just some shortcomings in the design that I wish weren't there. So either way, thank you, Webcore, for letting me showcase this planeswalker, and I hope that people find the fun in him. So that's going to be it for this one. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all the YouTube things if you are interested in what I'm putting out here. And I will see you in the next video.